Hi there everyone, and welcome to part 2 of our introduction and discussion on the Waterway Rehabilitation Framework. So just a brief summary of what we did in the part 1 video. I showed you guys how to go about adding both river-based and riparian-based points and reaches into your waterway system, how to connect them and have this system like it is over here. So as we can see, I've gone ahead and added all of the necessary points that fall within the Pinars River waterway system, which is the study area I'm working with. This is the more simplified schematic diagram view, and if we were to go ahead and click on the GIS view over here, we can see that is the system but depicted over the GIS map. So before I start showing you guys how to start generating reports and getting more information about the degradation at these points and reaches, the first thing I'd like to just make clear is the difference between inline and riparian. So when we speak of inline settings or inline options, it's basically this main line that is running down along here in the diagram. So that is basically your river-based points and reaches. When I speak of riparian, I am referring to these points and reaches off to the side of the main line. So basically points and reaches that are found on the banks of the river or the water system and not actually within the system itself. So when I'm referring to inline and riparian, when I start working with these settings, which I will show you guys in a little bit in this video, then take note that that is what I am referring to. Okay, so the first thing that I am going to start off by showing you guys is how we can gain some better information about degradation about specific points. So the specific points I will start with are the inline river-based points. So if you want to get more information about them to start discussing and getting an idea of the degradation happening there, if you simply go ahead and double click on one. So for example, I am going to select over here P4. It first opens this box. So this first page, the properties page, we should be very familiar with because that is the page we dealt with for the entirety of the part 1 video. But now if we go ahead and start looking at the other options here on the top right, that is where we are going to get our information about the current state of the degradation. So how these top right options are getting their information is through that connection that we've made to that water quality data set in the Excel sheet back in part 1. So if we go ahead and let's say click on the electrical conductivity, as you can see, it's showing us a very nicely depicted graph of the status of electrical conductivity, as well as giving us a table here on the date, the value, and the status. So as you can see, electrical conductivity at this specific point, the Bavians-Poort Sewage Works discharge, is not too bad. It's sitting in the good section. Some options don't have data, like this turbidity, for example. It's just blank. But the rest, they have got information like these ones over here. If you as the user wanted to focus more on the graph to make sure that you get your message across, if you go ahead and double click on the graph, you see that this box appears. You are therefore able to play around with the different options of your graph. You are able to export it, you're able to print it, you're able to play around with the data that's being shown, the colors of your graph. So you have quite the useful tool over here to make sure that your graph is clear and how you'd like it to be shown. Go ahead and close that. The other thing I'd like to attract your attention to is this rehabilitation button over here. So as you can see, the button is not activated at the moment, and that is because the current status of fluoride is sitting in very good. This button only activates when the status sits in very bad. So for example, over here when I click on nitrate, you can see that it is in the very bad status, and therefore the rehabilitation option is now activated. If you as the user would like to manually activate this button, you can go ahead and you just click the drop down, you make the current status very bad, and as you can see, the rehabilitation button is now activated. If I were to go ahead and click on the rehabilitation button, this box now pops up. So basically what this box is displaying is these are our rehabilitation options that we have defined within our entire system. So what I'm going to show you next is how you can go about editing, changing, removing, adding rehabilitation options before we can start generating options to a specific point. So if you go ahead and you close these, we're going to go into Waterway, and because it's an inline option, it's inline settings. So firstly, these are the rehabilitation options that I showed you a couple seconds ago, the options that are defined. Before I go about showing you guys how you can change those, I just want to point out how degradation has been divided into physical, chemical, and biological types of degradation. You as the user have the power to go and tick or untick these options, but for now I'm going to leave it as the default values. Going back to the rehab options, if you as the user have a rehabilitation option that you'd like to add because it's unique to your project, it's very simple to do. If you go ahead and click the insert record plus sign, you see that this empty row has been added. Let's say, for example, now I'm going to add one. So the position water type ID is 1, the impact ID is 0, the option ID will be 9 because there are already 8 existing, and let's just go ahead and say test. If I now go ahead and click this tick, you can see test has been added. If we go back to our point 4 and we go back to running the rehabilitation, you can see test has now been added as an option. If I wanted to rather now go and remove an option, again you just go back into your settings, you just highlight that and you click the minus, which is delete record. Click OK, and as you can see, it has now been removed. So if we go back into P4, we go back into nitrates and click rehab, you can see that the test option has now been removed. Okay, so once you are happy with your rehabilitation options that you've got within your system, what we can start doing now is generating rehab options specific to a point. So like I've been saying, this table here at the top is defining the general rehab options you have for your entire system. What we'd like to do now is add a rehab option specific to this Bavian sewage works discharge. So when it comes to choosing a specific option, you need to first make sure that the option is highlighted. So for example, let's go ahead and say that the first option I'd like to say is to treat sewage to tertiary stage. If I now have it highlighted and click the add button, this pop-up box appears. So basically what this box is doing is that it is defining constraints. These are our set constraints. I will show you in a little bit how you can go about adding, editing, or deleting these constraints, but for now let's just leave them as they are, and then rating these constraints for favorability from 1 being least favorable to 5 being most favorable. Very useful is also if you go ahead and now, let's say for budget, there's an approved budget. As you can see, I selected approved budget, it went yellow. You get a hint. So it's hinting you about how these constraints will affect your project. So for example, over here, it's saying that if there is an approved budget, then it is most likely or more likely that your project will be implemented. So I'm going to go ahead and just randomly set these values, but obviously you need to put some thought into them and define them logically for your project. As we can see, the constraints all have their own weighting, and also the value over here gives us an indication of how favorable these constraints are rating in the table. You also have the option to change the priority. So let's say priority is medium, so I'm going to set it to 4 out of 8. Something interesting to note here are these totals, basically giving us an indication of the favorability of the option. These totals will come in handy when we start comparing different options to one another. So for now, I'm going to leave it like that. When I click close, we can see that option has now been added to the bottom of the table. I'm going to go ahead and add another option just so that we can compare the two. So I'm going to select farmers to collect irrigation effluent for reuse. Again, I just click add. I'm going to randomly set those values, and as we can see, that has now been added. So what we can do now is we can go ahead and generate a report. When I click the Reports button, we can see that this report for a specific point, the Baviaanspoort Sewage Works discharge point, has been generated, and it's specific to those 2 rehabilitation options that we have included. So what this report is showing us is how these options fare with regards to the different constraints here at the top, and then also giving us the total. So what this total is telling us is that the treat sewage to tertiary stage option gets a total of 148, which is greater than farmers to collect irrigation effluent for reuse, meaning that the first option is more favorable than the second. If we go ahead and close this, I just want to show you that it is also possible to change these options without having to delete them and re-add them. If you simply go ahead and highlight the option like that, and then say edit constraint, you can go ahead and play with these constraints and change them accordingly. Okay, so now that we have discussed our inline rehabilitation for specific points, I'm now going to show you guys how to do it for a riparian based point. Similarly to how we got information on a specific inline river-based point, if I just go ahead and double-click on a riparian-based point, for example here the Marietta high-density residential area, again this first properties page we are very familiar with. We dealt with it the entirety of part 1 video, but now what we can do is go ahead and click on this riparian impacts drop-down. So basically this impacts table up here at the top is defining all of the different impacts that we have within the system. I will show you shortly how you can go about editing, removing or adding specific impacts, but for now let's just work with the default values that we have. So with riparian points, we do not have specific quality data attached to it. So all of these riparian impacts are basically observations made at the points. So from this table of all of the general options, what we want to do is now populate this bottom table with options specific to this point, the Marietta high density residential area. So again, you want to make sure that the option you choose is highlighted. For example, let's choose over option 2 here, impacts due to converting riparian area to road or paved surfaces, compaction of riparian areas, soil. So now that that's highlighted, I can go ahead and click the add button. After adding that specific rehab option, a set of sub-rehabilitation options appear. So these are sub-options to our main option. Again, you need to just go ahead and highlight one. Let's highlight number 2 again, and again just click add. We're familiar with this table because we did it previously for the inline river-based points. So what you can do is go ahead and define how your option is faring with favorability in terms of these specific constraints. You can also play around with priority if you'd like. Once that's done, you can click close and you can see that it's been populated in this bottom table. Again, I'm going to add a second option. Let's just say, for example, option number 4 there. Click add. This one doesn't have any sub options, so it goes straight to generating this favorability table. Again, I'm just going to randomly populate this. Please, for your specific project and study area, give some serious thought into this because it does affect the prioritizing of your rehab options. Once that's been set, we can go ahead and click close and generate the report. Again, once the report has been generated, it's just showing us how the options fare with regards to the different constraints, and then the total telling us that option 1 over here of replanting original vegetation is more favorable than option 2. Right, so once we have done that, I just want to show you how you can go about editing those options. So if you go Waterway, we're now working with riparian points, so we go riparian settings and we use this drop down. Let's say the first thing we want to look at is the constraints. So these are those predefined constraints that we have in the system. If you would like to either delete a constraint, you just go ahead and highlight it and click the minus, delete record. If you'd like to add one, you just click the plus record, and as you can see, this empty row has been generated. You can go ahead and define your constraint and define how its levels of favorability from 1 to 5. Also with this drop down, you can look at the impacts. So these are all of the different impacts that are predefined. Again, you can go ahead and add or delete, as well as the rehabilitation options. You have the option to add and delete. With regards to the constraints, if you would like to get a better understanding of the predefined constraints within the system, if you go to help and you generate the user manual, the user manual is automatically then popped up in this PDF format. If we go to page 43, that is where the constraints are defined. So you as the user are able to go ahead and just read up on the predefined default constraints and just familiarize yourself better with that. This user manual is also really useful if you would just like to kind of understand the software a bit better, or if you have any questions about that. So now that I've shown you how to generate reports to specific points, both inline, river-based, or riparian-based, what I will now show you how to do is generate an overall report for your entire waterway system. Okay, so when it comes to generating an overall report for your entire waterway system, it's very simple. You're going to go ahead and click on Reports over here, top right, and as you can see, this table then appears. So what this table is telling us is that it is the rehabilitation summary report for this specific waterway that we have created, and these are the rehabilitation options when the filter is set to all. So this filter you can change to either be river-based or riparian-based, and then depending, let's say you change it to river-based, you can then also filter it more to those inline impacts. So what this is telling us is the rehabilitation option is defined. It's telling us which point the rehab option is specific for, and then it's also telling us this total, which is giving us an indication of the favorability of the option. If we were to take it back to being filtered to all, this total is something that you should definitely take note of. This total right now is basically just score only. But if you drop down and you change this view to, let's say, priority weighted score, which is the priority multiplied by the score multiplied by the weight, you can see that that total value has now changed, and the options, the order of the options has shifted as well. So it's up to you as the user to make sure that you play with this view and these settings accordingly to best suit your project. Alrighty guys, so that is a wrap up of part 2 of 2. I really hope that you found these videos useful. Please find attached the contact details of the creators of this software, Nxt2u, and don't be shy to contact them if you have any questions or queries. Cheers.